So let's dive right in, shall we?
To claim that a guy can't do engineering on platonic solids and come up with something new, the Rubik's Cube, the Habermas switch pitch, these things prove that that's not true.
I think it's a foolish.
Okay. Eric here has made a claim that somebody has made this claim that people can't do something with platonic solids. I don't know why he uses platonic solids. I don't know where that initial claim came from. So I'm going to say a straw man. That's Eric Weinstein straw manning something. Okay. Now he might be straw manning a bunch of critics, and some of them might be, we'll say, authorized critics or experts or something in the field who are going after Terrence Howard, saying something like, you don't have a degree, therefore you can't. I understand that, but the general critique is not that. Okay, there's lots of people who are not saying you can't do this. They're saying what you're doing is wrong, Terrence, because you're starting from bad first principles. So Eric is implying that Terrence is starting from the first principle of platonic solids and trying to derive something. That's actually false, observably false. So I don't know why he's making the claim. That's why I say it's a straw man. But let's continue with the Joe Rogan part of this equation.
Thing almost always to pretend there's nothing new under the sun. You should always consider it.
Well,
okay. Now here, Joe, look, I like Joe, but foolish to say there's nothing new under the sun. That isn't the critique of Terrence Howard. The critique of Terrence Howard is that he's not starting from reasonable first principles and deriving anything. I think where everyone's confused about Terrence Howard is they don't understand that the fact that you can derive new things is not interesting. 3-year-olds do it all the time. It's called fantasy and imagination. Everybody can do this trick. Actually, or nearly everybody. So no one's critiquing his imagination or his fantasy land. No one. What they're critiquing is his claim that it is somehow scientific and his attack on people who don't agree with his claim or people who have theses and theories and hypotheses that are counter to his claim. That's an invalid critique, by the way. So I don't know where Joe's getting this from either. Like I don't understand this. It's this boundless hopefulness that some personal, individual, private fantasy is somehow more important or significant than science, which is a weird turning, right? It's a strange turning, and we're living in strange times. I've talked about this before on my live streams. Like, we're living in chaos, and this is more chaos. It's not rational, except in defense of individualism, which is how we got here.
It might not be correct, but there's only one way to find out.
Well, there's a difference between, you see, Terrence has much greater odds of contributing to the world of engineering than he does to the world of mathematics. I mean, the odds that he's doing something new in mathematics, I'll be blunt, are very, very small.
Even though I have...
Okay. So I don't know the purpose of Eric making this point, right? It doesn't really matter if somebody can make a new finding in mathematics or engineering. Yes, engineering is, quote, more likely mathematically. Do you see the problem? Right. The more likely depends on the mathematics. That's actually a problem. But it's not relevant to whether or not he's correct about something. So the fact that I am more likely to go outside than I am to stay in all day does not say anything about the quality of my commentary of this video. They're not connected at all. In the same way, Eric's critique is not connected to Terrence's claims. If you could connect his claims to your critique, that might be useful, but this is not useful. This is not a helpful way to talk about the world. The fact that something is tangentially true and has nothing to do with the topic at hand is not interesting. It's not relevant. You want relevance realization? Eric Weinstein can't help you because he doesn't have any in this instance. It's important to know. That's the difference between relevance and irrelevance.
Patents on it that shows that all of this is
I
novel.
don't want to go there. The patents do not speak to what you think that they speak to.
Now, there's a valid critique, right? Terrence is saying, I have a patent, therefore I have authority, therefore. And Eric is saying, your patents don't say what you think they say. And that is true at multiple levels. A, the patent isn't interesting. I'm sorry, Reddit, it's not interesting. It's not a breakthrough. It's not something that, it also wasn't executed. So he doesn't have the patent. That's a false statement. I don't know why people don't point that out. He doesn't have the patent. It isn't his. Sorry, dude. You may have tried to patent the idea first, but you did not, in fact, do so. That's on you. So the claim is false. I don't know why we can't start with that is a false claim. We seem to have a very big problem in society just telling people they're lying or what they're saying is false or that they're wrong or that they're incorrect. I don't know why. And that's why I do these. Like, this is just wrong. Terrence makes a bad claim. So yeah, that's wrong. What else is wrong? The patent doesn't indicate anything mathematically significant. There's no math in his patent. Sorry. Right? The claim of the patent is not interesting. It's kind of banal, actually. It's sort of obvious to any technologist, and I am a technologist with decades of experience, so I can speak about this authoritatively, having done this sort of thing. This is not an interesting patent that wouldn't have been derived otherwise. There are other patents around it, as they say, that clearly show other people were thinking about this in this way. Eric doesn't address that, but he's right. He's also right in that the patent does not match his axiomatic claims upon which all of his other assumptions are based. I know this is hard to see. Sabine Hassenfelder has a video about this, and she actually does a reasonably good scientific critique. I'll link it here of this. And it's important to have a good scientific critique so that you can see that Eric isn't doing that. So you can say, well, Eric's really smart, whatever. Well, Sabine seems to be smarter then under those auspices because she actually does the critique of the work instead of, I don't know what Eric's doing. He seems to be playing both sides, right? He seems to be trying to let him into the scientific circle or something silly and also trying to tamp him down and control him. I mean, that's very much what's going on here. So I think it's important to notice.
That's okay.
Look, you can see into my heart. I'm not trying to.
No. All
right.
But we were talking.
Okay. Here, Eric is making an appeal to emotions. You can see into my heart. Okay. I can't see into anyone's heart, including my own. I don't know where anybody gets a claim like that. That's completely insane claim, in my opinion. If anybody makes that claim, run away from them. Sorry, seriously, just get away from them immediately. They're dangerous. I can't see into other people's hearts. I can't see into my own heart. This is documented in poetry, in fiction, in neuroscience, like in psychology. I don't even know where you get a claim like that. I have no idea. There's no information from the outside world that you can have that gives you the authority to make a claim like that. It's an absurd claim. Okay? So I don't know where that comes from, other than pure manipulation. I'm not saying he's doing it sort of rationally and knowingly and consciously, but also manipulation. I'm a pragmatist. I don't care why. I really don't. I care that, right? Because that I have to deal with the that, and I don't have to deal with the why. So why is he doing this? He doesn't want to strangle the guy's dreams. Fair enough, right? He doesn't want to push him down or hold him back. Okay, but maybe that's what he needs to grow. Because we all need that to grow. That happened to all of us as children. And maybe it was traumatic for us and we've forgotten, or maybe we've said, oh, if that didn't happen, I'd be better, which is a load of garbage. But that's what he's doing. And so he's infantilizing Terrence in a way, but he's also not being a good father figure to him and saying, no, dude, you're just wrong about this. He didn't do it with explaining you don't even hold the patent, and he's not doing it here.
I told you that they produce a supersymmetrical structure.
When you say supersymmetry, I don't know that you know what a supersymmetry is.
What does supersymmetry mean to you, Terrence?
Supersymmetry means that all things come together, fit together, relate to each other. They're self-referential, and
whoa, what a weird definition of supersymmetry, right? All things come together. Sounds Neoplatonic, right? They relate together. Sounds Neoplatonic. They're self-referencing. Okay. I know I've been over this before. I'll go over it again here. Self-reference is bad. Things cannot it doesn't even make any sense to have things self-reference. Individualism is the belief in self-reference. It's the belief in self-naming. It's the belief that you can determine something about yourself independent of other factors. That is false. That is impossible. It doesn't make any sense. If you try to map it mathematically, it doesn't work. I know, I've tried. It doesn't work. We know why it doesn't work. There's mathematical theories about why this can't work. Like I don't even know what else to say. Like, you're so wrong. The word wrong doesn't cover how wrong you are. You're wrong at every level. There's no such thing as self-reference. Sorry. And there never will be, and there never can be, by definition. And when you throw out definitions, this is the kind of relativistic garbage you get. Self-reference isn't a useful concept because it just says things are what they are, but it doesn't tell you what they are. And therefore, they can be anything. And obviously, things can't be anything because then you can't determine one thing from another. Kind of sucks.
They are from a fractal that comes back to that same fractal space.
Okay. Terrence also doesn't understand what fractals are, apparently, although he is describing them adequately. Fractals do not self-reference at all, even a little bit, by the way. They have starting points, right? And they have, what would you call them? They have principles that they follow, and you need both a starting point and a principle. And then what unfolds is, in some sense, unpredictable, right? At least using all available tools, right? That's what makes fractals interesting. Benoit Mandelbrot is the expert on this stuff, and I've read much of his stuff. It's pretty good, actually. It's kind of a breakthrough. So I don't know where Terrence is getting this from. He's very confused, and someone should tell him that.
That's supersymmetry.
So what you mean is a symmetry that is amped up, but supersymmetry is a reserved term that means something hyper-particular.
And that's what this
between
is.
bosons and fermions.
That's what this is. This is...
Okay. I don't know what a symmetry hyped up would be because Eric doesn't define it here. He also doesn't attempt to give a word to what Terrence has described. These are just basic errors. I don't know what else to say. These are errors. That's why I'm doing this, to show you errors. Those are errors. If you're intellectually capable, competent, and honest, you would at least try to name what he's talking about here. And first start with a no. That's not supersymmetry. He didn't say no. He just gave an alternate definition. Now, you may find this hard to believe, but that's called talking past one another. That's technically what it is. Because you're not seeking agreement. You're not seeking common ground. You're ceding their definition to them for the same term, and you're keeping your definition for yourself for the same term. That's talking past one another. That's what it is. This is an example of people talking past one another. Let's see to what extent it continues.
The bosons, for the layman out there, the boson, the cloud, the whole boson thing is the force field or the energy field. The fermions is considered the matter aspects of it.
So if we can go into he's got 5 of these patterns, one of which he...
Okay, note, Terrence just gave a completely bogus physics definition of something. Eric almost certainly knows that that's completely incorrect. And rather than confront him and try to help him and correct him, he just switches the subject entirely back to the novel, new, interesting thing. Okay. It's not a novel, new, interesting thing, first of all. This is a structure that's been known about for a very long time. Sorry, Terrence. It's not new. Why we're switching the topic, I don't know. We should probably resolve the differences, but we're still talking past. I don't know how that's helping either party, by the way. I don't understand the advantage. This is not a good thing. And it's a not good thing.
He calls the...
But what is wrong with the term supersymmetry?
Then I want to see an algebra, which is a linear vector space which has an object called a bracket, and I want to see that bracket obeys a super Jacobi identity, and otherwise there's no supersymmetry.
But
so it's a specifically used scientific term.
It's a
and he's using it
reserved term of art.
Yeah, but it's
okay. Eric is technically correct. But he also doesn't explain the confusion, right? This would be helpful here, so I'm going to attempt as best I can to explain the confusion, keeping in mind I know absolutely none of this math. I can't do algebra to save my soul. However, the common definition of supersymmetry is usually done with respect to geometries as such, and so when they try to do the science communication thing and they try to communicate a complex physics topic or mathematical topic to an unsophisticated, unmathematical, unphysics knowledgeable audience, right? When they do that, they describe supersymmetries in terms of geometric symmetries, which is not to say they aren't geometric symmetries. They just involve additional dimensions, I think is the best way to understand it. We don't understand dimensions, so it might be the best way and completely useless at the same time, by the way, because that happens. And that's where Terrence's confusion is. He's used to seeing the watered down scientific version of this, right? The pop sci version. And so he's just confused because what he has fits the pop sci version of supersymmetry for sure. Just that is a very compressed flat world version of what supersymmetry is. The supersymmetry has to obey certain mathematical principles because it's a mathematical principle. It really doesn't have to do geometry in that way because geometry is being mapped by the mathematics, and the mathematics is determining, we'll say, the term, not even the geometry. And ironically, this is where Terrence might actually have an opening. Like, you can do this with geometry, and we don't have a mathematical mapping to explain it. I don't think that's true in this case, by the way, but that happens. That's happened in geometry and mathematics many times, right? Euclidean versus non-Euclidean. There's a simple example. You can look that up. That's not hard to understand. But like that, even that isn't brought forth. And then you can see Joe Rogan, which is what he does best, try to mediate this and sort of dumb it down a little bit and explain it. Oh, you mean this is a specific thing? Eric uses the term of art, which, and I guess that's okay. I mean, this gets into the ivory tower, and can you really claim the language for yourself and say supersymmetry, which is a perfectly understandable term outside of mathematics and physics and just say therefore. I'm not going to fall one way or the other on that. I'm just pointing it out. Like, there can be two different understandings of the term supersymmetry. It doesn't have to be exclusive. And to some extent, Eric is giving way on this, but not very clearly. That would be my argument. It's not very clear that that's what he's doing, if that is what he intends to do. I can't really tell. And that's a problem. Like, he's just not being clear.
Geometry is its own proof. Supersymmetry in geometry allows you to visualize, like you look at the ocean and you see the supersymmetry associated with it.
I think what he...
Okay. I don't know what Terrence is talking about. At some point, he just goes off the rails, right? And so when he says geometry is its own proof, what he seems to be referring to, and this is extremely common, especially now in the age of gnosis, right, where knowledge is propositions and knowledge is the highest value. He seems to be describing the fact that you can observe and experience geometry directly, and that's what he means by proof. It's a reasonable definition of proof, by the way. I actually rather prefer that definition of proof. Unfortunately, his example is incorrect. I am a sailor, among other things, and the ocean does not have anything that could be described as even the pop sci version of supersymmetry. The ocean appears to follow certain principles, but it's a lot of them, and the combination of them is, to use a John Vervaeke term, combinatorially explosive. I know that's not exclusive to John Vervaeke, but also and this is where the supersymmetry idea comes back. It's not combinatorially explosive. I talked about this on a recent live stream. When you're sailing, there is a way in which certain people, this is the problem, not everybody, by far not everybody, not even every sailor I've met who's a reasonable sailor can do this. Some people can look at the water and figure out, based on apparently just the color, but probably other things too that we maybe sense but don't quite have words for yet, whether or not the water is a certain way because of a current, because of the wind, or because of the depth. That's actually really important in sailing, because if there's a rock just below the surface, that changes the apparent color of the water. Color doesn't capture it. That's the problem. And therefore, right? And some people can do that, and not a lot of people can do that. So, yes, if you want to describe supersymmetry as the collapse of combinatorial explosion, and I think you should, actually, but he doesn't have that sense at all. Like, he doesn't have any of that discernment. You can tell because of his description, as opposed to my description. I'm like, yeah, the ocean follows certain principles. They're not really supersymmetries, though. The supersymmetries are a result of the fact that while mathematically the principles are combinatorially explosive, in reality they're not. They're actually ordered. And that's actually, I'm not going to go into it in this video, obviously. That's a way more interesting thing. And this gets into the intelligent design theorists. Jonathan Peugeot did a video recently with one of them. I'll probably link it here because it's a fascinating video. It doesn't make that particular point as well as I would like, but that is kind of the point. Like, well, there's all these combinations that are possible, and yet only a few ever work. What's that? It's a good question. There's all these principles at play in the ocean, and combinatorially explosive, and yet you can navigate the ocean. What is that? Because I don't know, and I can do it. So that's way more interesting. We're not going to go into that in this video.
What he's saying is you're talking about a thing and you're using the term supersymmetry, and he's saying that supersymmetry only applies to a very specific thing.
Because in their
that's
math,
been defined.
No, in their math, the Platonic solids, like I said before, have a discrete symmetry. You can only line up the blocks and all of those things. You can't put all of them together and tell a full story to where they fold into each other.
I don't think.
Okay. So here's Joe playing, rightly. I mean, it's his podcast, and this is what he does best, right? He's playing arbiter, right? He's trying to get these two people to come together. He's trying to explain something to Terrence that Terrence clearly can't see. And then there's Terrence going off again, not understanding the point. First of all, his point is wrong, just flat out incorrect. Again, he's just flat out wrong. What he's describing is interesting to me because he's describing that the way the math people deal, the way their math deals with Platonic solids is linear and discrete. That's what he just described. I'm a big fan of this. See the knowledge engine model. I'll link it here. We talk about this. That is a way of thinking about the world that many people are trapped in the age of gnosis, for sure. Also, he's wrong. The math does allow for all these things, and supersymmetry in particular is one type of math that does exactly what he's discussing, which is unify things along multiple dimensions. That is the purpose of things like supersymmetry, right? Where symmetry is more linear. It's not entirely linear. I don't want to say that because I don't think it is. But supersymmetry is linear across multiple dimensions. That's a reasonable way to think about it from my limited understanding.
I think he's disagreeing with you with that. I think he's disagreeing the term
You're
that
using
you're
a
using.
reserved term of art.
Okay.
And you're using it incorrectly.
That's what he said.
And you're going to pay a penalty. In which
Okay, I don't want to play no penalties.
Like, this is a
I got
thing.
enough-
Okay. So again, you notice that Eric is making this this claim of authority over this term. And again, to be a little bit fair to Terrence, like that's not the pop sci version. And that's what he has. He's clearly not a mathematician. I'm also not a mathematician, thank goodness. I think we have too many of those already, honestly. So, like, why are you dinging? Like, non-mathematicians use that term all the time. Non-physicists use supersymmetry all the time. So I don't understand the repeated need for the claim of authority, for the claim of ownership over the term. Like, and this pay a penalty. You're going to pay a penalty to the people who know what it is. Why should Terrence care about that? Because I don't think he should. Like, I don't, like, whatever. I mean, it's ironic that Eric talked about the engineering, right? And then said, you sure you can make an engineering breakthrough. Well, all the science follows from the engineering, not the other way around. So who cares? Who cares about the hardcore physicists and the scientists and the chemists? When I worked at Polaroid, my director was a very smart guy. I really miss him. He was saying our battery division of Polaroid makes new discoveries all the time that rewrite physics. And I looked into it at the time, and he's correct. That was happening back then. And I forget the numbers, but I think he said it was 1,000 chemical interactions per second happen as the result of our instant film, Polaroid instant film. So these chemists are constantly in the film and battery divisions, because they're two separate divisions at Polaroid when I was there, are constantly making these findings that don't fit the current physics models. And the physics models, they're minor adjustments, to be fair. The physics models have to be adjusted. Right? That doesn't happen as the result of physics or theoretical physics or practical physics. It happens as a result of engineering. So the engineering drives these guys who talk about supersymmetry, not the other way around. That's important to know. Like, science all the time claims it makes all these breakthroughs and discoveries. And no, it does not. That's just a lie that they tell you. Science discovers the explanations for what the engineers have done. And that engineer may be the creator of the universe, right? Like maybe they discover the explanation for how flowers bloom or something. Fine. But flowers were blooming before your physics existed. So what are we talking about here? And it's actually the physicists and the mathematicians that hold back progress more than anyone else, because they're always telling people, no, that can't be done because the physics doesn't allow for it. That happens all the time. It happens today. It's happening now. And there's a long history of this. If you just look into the history of any scientific discovery, you'll find this is exactly what happens. The existing scientists, the existing physicists repeatedly tell the new guys they can't do what they want to do. And to be fair to Eric, this is what he's trying to do to some extent. He's trying to put Terrence in a position where he can be one of these rogue maverick discoverers of something. But, not bucking the current physics and math guys is never the way that works, or almost never. So who cares?
Where, like, if I'm watching an MMA fight and someone's doing commentary and they call a kick wrong, I'm
Right.
like, why are you doing this? You don't even know what that is. Like, you incorrectly reference something that's very specific that we've been talking about for a long time.
If you're if you're getting
Okay. So here, Joe pulls the same trick, right? Oh, you're not using my tribe's language. Why are you doing that? Well, if they're not in your tribe, they can't do that, and they shouldn't do that. Right? If somebody comes into the computer industry and they start saying, the internet works through network effects, I'm like, what are you talking about? Right? And they're probably using the internet to refer to the people on the internet. But the internet, from a IT perspective, from a technology perspective, is the technology that makes the communication possible, not the communication itself and not the results of it. Like, we don't look at the packets and go, oh, well, these are all Facebook packets and therefore, like, nobody cares about that unless you work at Facebook and you want to filter something, but it's just not the right perspective on the world. So you wouldn't want somebody doing that because it doesn't allow you to do good technology work. That's fair. But, it's not clear to me, like, are you trying to let him in? What are you trying to do? I don't think he should be let in to these clubs. I don't know why you'd want to. I don't know what use that is. The changes come from outside primarily, not from inside. Everybody misses that. That's true in every domain. Everyone. Science, kickboxing, everything. Sorry. It's a principle of reality.
getting intimate with your lady and you're into rough play and she's not wearing any clothes, is it a rear naked choke if she grabs you from behind? No. A rear naked choke is a particular move.
Yes.
It doesn't have anything to
particular.
do with what she did.
Right.
So
Okay. Eric's wrong. Sorry. There are people that use the term rear naked choke in a different way because they're doing a different thing in a different context. You can't own the language because your tribe uses the language this way. Okay? At that point, you're talking about jargon. There's nothing wrong with jargon. I'm actually a fan of jargon. You need jargon. Jargon's important because it's specific to a context. So it's a usurpation of the language, technically. Jargon is a usurpation of the language to a specific telos within a specific set of boundaries or rules or container. That's what it is. There's nothing wrong with you need that. You can't actually have computer science as such, and information theory as a subgenre, if you will, of computer science without jargon. It's impossible. It's technically impossible. Why? Because the combinatorial explosion of description destroys your ability to speak fast enough to implement. Technically. And this has been mapped, by the way. This isn't my work, or I didn't come up with this. This is well known for people who study it. But the thing is, everyone's lazy and no one looks anything up. I spent all my day researching, and then I realized no one's ever researched this to this degree ever, in some cases. And I can prove that, by the way. It's just ridiculous. There's a lot of research out there that nobody reads, and it's right there for you to read. And maybe you shouldn't read it. I get that. You should be out tending your garden like I should be now. But also, like, don't make claims then that you know stuff if you don't even research anything. And it's a huge problem. The jargon's fine. Like, whatever. Other people can use your terms differently as jargon. Too bad. It's just jargon on your side and jargon on their side, and they're equal.
So is there
Unless she gets the hooks in.
question in the world of physics, in the world of mathematics, is there a supersymmetrical system, geometric system, ever been produced in mathematics?
Yes. In mathematics, yes.
What
We've
is
never
it?
seen super Poincare algebra.
Yeah, but that's on a plane. That's not volumetrically. That doesn't scale up.
Terrence, you have
Okay. This is what's so fascinating. All right. Like, I have to side with Terrence here. Listen to his description. Listen to what he's actually saying. That's on a plane. That's 2 dimensions. All planes are definitionally 2-dimensional. He's correct. Well, I mean, he's not correct because supersymmetry is not on a plane explicitly, right? But what he's saying effectively is you're stuck in a flat world and I'm not. And my supersymmetry explains the not flat world, or what I would call the enchanted world. I have several videos on enchanted world now, 3 actually. Watch any one of them. One live stream and 2, one's on enchantment as such, one's on enchanted world. Watch any one of those videos. They'll give you a sense for this actually. And then go back to the knowledge engine model, which I linked earlier in this video, and understand linear and discrete deals with the 2-dimensional plane, with the flatness, with the flat world, with the disenchanted world. That's what it does, and it can't do anything else ever. Ever. Not an option. That's the limitation of it. This is very useful because it adds accuracy and precision to the world. Right? But it also disenchants whatever you're putting in that world. This is exactly what Terrence has described. The disenchanted flat world. He said that's stuck on a plane. It doesn't account for scale. The 2 dimension doesn't account for scale. There's no scale in 2-dimensional world. That is true. Scale, it isn't, but it is linked to the z-axis, the 3-dimensional world, or maybe the 4-dimensional world, depending upon how you want to look at these things. But it's linked to additional dimensions above 2. It's not linked to dimensions of 2 or less. That's for sure. And that's what a plane is. A plane is a 2-dimensional constraint. And there is no scale. That is true. We do misuse the term scale, particularly in geometry, to talk about a measure. Okay, but scale as a measure in 2 dimensions does not have the quality of scale in 3 dimensions, where scale causes a change in the results of a principle. Principle doesn't change. The results of a principle change. One example I like to use for this, just because it's an easy example for me, is in computers. Cosmic rays hit your computer all the time, and they cause problems with your memory. The computer memory has many methods for fixing this. In a standard consumer desktop machine, standard memory does a fine job, and you'll probably not get a significant amount of memory corruption that will crash your machine often enough to worry about. It's not that it never happens, it just doesn't happen often. Memory corruption can also happen through electronic EMF and other things. Usually they're minor, but sometimes they're not, right? This is one of the great problems with processor speed improvements. Like once you get past 5 gigs, the CPU puts out a frequency that interferes with the other components, including just the board traces and stuff, right? It causes a radio interference. In memory, when you're dealing with corporate systems or cloud systems or anything, there's a whole different type of memory called ECC. There's other different types, but ECC, I forget the ECC. It's error correction, basically, right? So it not only finds the errors, but it fixes multi-bit errors. Well, why do you need to fix multi-bit errors in a corporate system and not in a home system? Well, A, it's super expensive. Like there's way more components. There's a lot more going on. Also, it happens more often because large systems that aren't home systems tend to have lots more memory than home systems, more than double. And third, it's more important. Like that data cannot get corrupted. And so a 1 in 10 billion or 100 billion event in a corporate system that's busy all the time, unlike your home system, which is practically never busy, ultimately, is a common occurrence. And so at the scale of I use this to pay my bills and look at cat videos on the internet, 100 billion doesn't happen often enough that it affects anything that you need to worry about it. But that 100 billion rule still applies. The cosmic arrays are still there. But at the corporate scale, it has an impact. Same rule, different result. Nothing changed except the scale. That's why scale is important. Scale doesn't have that quality in 2 dimensions at all. Nothing changes across 2 dimensions, across scale. Nothing. Scale is just a linear, discrete, consistent, precise measurement in 2 dimensions. And it isn't that in 3 or more dimensions. That's important. And this is kind of what Terrence is pointing to, also poorly, and he's wrong. Like supersymmetry does account for multiple dimensions. It's not flat.
I have an entire way of thinking that is completely foreign to everyone that I know. And I've tried to understand what it is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not a question.
No, it's not. I don't think he's saying this is a negative.
No. I didn't see it as a negative.
Okay. So now we get down to brass tacks. You don't see the world the way everybody else does. Isn't that an interesting statement? That's a fascinating statement. This is the thing that almost everybody doesn't account for anywhere online. I don't think the way other people think at all, even close. Neither does Terrence. That's fine. I don't care. Outliers are fine. Outliers have to exist. Like it's a statement of an observation in the world. This is more true to a greater degree than you realize. And I was oddly thinking about this morning. I've never not understood that because I've never, ever in my life once been around somebody who sees what I see as much as I see, hears what I hear as much as I hear, is able to attend to those things as well as I am, feels what I feel, smells as good as I smell. Some people hear, see, smell, and feel things that I do not, for sure. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying my capacity to take in my senses is way beyond anybody I've met. Way beyond. It's not even close. And there are some people, for example, who see way more colors than I do. And in that, their ability to visually take in more information is greater than mine. That happens. Same with hearing, same with smell, same with touch. But I've never met anybody that had 2 of those better than me or larger than me, if you want to measure it that way. It's kind of sticky and tricky to talk about. But also, yeah. So I've always had an appreciation for what I call the enchanted world, right? I've always had that because I live it all the time when I'm around other people. It's also why it's hard to be around other people because I'm experiencing things and they're experiencing things and they aren't the same things. And I get confused by this because I don't know why they're not the same things. I'm like, what's going on here? Right? And so this is not confusing to me, but this is confusing to a lot of people because they make assumptions that isn't the case when it is. And you see, Joe Rogan again, anticipating a problem that isn't a problem. Right? But you can tell, I don't know why I paused it there, but that's perfect. You can tell that Joe's kind of thinking like, oh, Terrence is going to feel bad. But what Terrence feels is alone. And Joe's in treatment, oh, no, you shouldn't look at this as a bad thing, doesn't help Because if Terrence sees the world uniquely to anybody else Eric Weinstein's ever met, which is what Eric stated, then he's alone in the world to a degree that he didn't know was possible before. Fair. That's probably true.
But
what I'm trying to say is, if the reason that science works as well as it does is that up until very recently, there were clear rules, cultures. We agreed to leave certain things that are at the door, like our religious beliefs. We agreed to submit to certain sorts of things. We were decent to each other. And that system is in a process of collapse at the moment. All right?
Okay. Almost all of what Eric said is wrong. Science came out of religion. Einstein would have been appalled at his statements. We know this. This is well documented. I think Eric doesn't really understand an important artifact of history, which is that in the 1920s and 30s, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, and up until at least the 1960s, again, if memory serves, the percentage of people that identified as Christians or had a belief in God was, in the United States, was around 80%. The percentage of scientists, physicists especially, that believed in God was around 80%. Einstein said God does not play dice with the universe. Boy, that sure sounds like he's using a religious presupposition to justify his science. This is Jordan Peterson's excellent and correct point. Religion is the presupposition that allows for science to exist. Period. End of statement. Full stop. That has to be true. It was explicitly born of science. Now, the science people will make a great deal out of Galileo, and I suggest they read a book, one once ever, on this subject. And they will, hopefully, unless it's a really bad book, historically inaccurate, will understand that all the things they say about Galileo and his persecution are just false. They're just false. They just didn't happen. Sorry. The church, the Catholic Church in particular, usually only entreats people not to preach, not to learn for themselves, not to have information, and not to spread information, but to do so carefully. In other words, don't give forbidden knowledge out to other people. Ironically, this is one of the themes of Plato's Republic, and nobody ever mentions that. You don't know why. Maybe they're self-serving individualists. Probably. So it's important to know that Eric is sitting in a fantasy where there's some objective material reality independent of religion, independent of maybe culture or something. It's hard to know all the things he's lumping in here, that operates on something which he hasn't listed, maybe called logic, reason, and rationality, right? That is what science relies on. And it's like, logic, reason, and rationality are great. I know I have to do a video on this, but they're highly manipulable based on starting conditions. Starting axioms determine what conclusions logic, reason, and rationality come to. Logic, reason, and rationality do not give you independent conclusions. They cannot. It doesn't work. And I will do the proof for that at some point. I got to find reasonable ways to do it. It's actually, things like that are very easy for me to do in the moment when I have a starting position. When I have to come up with a starting position on my own, that's when everything breaks apart for me. There's too many frames. Like, how do you pick one? It's crazy. So Eric's just wrong about this. Hysterically, in some sense, I feel bad for the guy because he clearly doesn't understand the history of science is based in religion. And you can't actually do science without religious presuppositions. And when you try to do science without religious presuppositions like creation, to say you don't start from the Big Bang, you end up with string theory. String theory is absurd. It's ridiculous and it's completely insane. Yeah, it's supported by the mathematics. Lots of things are supported by the mathematics. You know what? You know what else, though? Lots of things don't have a mathematical model to explain them. That should be a hint. Mathematics doesn't explain the world. And some math doesn't map to the world. And they forget to mention this to you regularly, but you can look it up. I have. I've talked to mathematicians and physicists about it too. They're aware of this. They just conveniently leave it out. Some of them. Some of them are perfectly honest about it, and you just never hear from them because they're not pop sci. Fair. You can't hear everything. That's why forbidden knowledge is real. That's why maybe popular science shouldn't be a thing. Not saying it shouldn't, but maybe.
Now, Terrence comes from an earlier way of thinking when things were much more wide open. You don't find many polymaths anywhere in a respectable position anymore. Terrence is coming from a polymathic perspective. He's all over the map in terms of the quality of his thinking. As far as I understand, some of his stuff is really, really good. Some of his stuff is offensive. And it's everything in between. Now, I'm not gunning for you.
No. I don't take.
Okay. So many problems. What Eric does here is he basically says, your thinking's all over the place. I don't like some of it. Some of it's okay. There's no polymaths in important positions. Right. And historically, there never were. Why is this interesting? I don't even understand why you'd mention that. But this is the assumption of the age of gnosis, where gnosis is propositions and gnosis is the highest value. Where somehow being smart should put you at the top of something. I got news. It shouldn't. The worst thing that's ever happened is when we've put smart people in charge of things who are academically intelligent. Sorry, just historical fact. I don't even know what else to say. Read a history book just one once ever, and you'll see it. It's right there. Right? Very smart people get ahead of themselves. They get arrogant, like Eric is. They get arrogant, and they start believing they can predict things because they've predicted other things, and they don't realize those two things aren't the same, or that their prediction was lucky, because that happens too. Nassim Taleb talks about this, by the way, quite a bit. Read all his books. They're great. And so he makes the mistake of thinking, well, these people should be in, quote, important, whatever that means. He's not even defining it. Positions. No, they should not. And we know this through experience. Let's go with that. Look, I mean, I'm going to end it here. I think I've done enough exemplification of what's going on here. I wish that any of these three people were smart enough, brave enough, strong enough, and willing enough to push back on each other in a helpful way that was generative, where they could generate a good idea. The fact that anyone, Terrence Howard, Eric Weinstein, Joe Rogan, myself, has a good idea is not interesting or important. 3-year-olds have good ideas all the time. Technically, talk to one. Hey, I don't understand. Like, how do people not know this? Talk to one. They have good ideas. That's not interesting. Just because you have a good idea doesn't mean it's practical. It doesn't even mean it's implementable. It's not an interesting fact of the world. It's omnipresent. It's universal. Like, who cares? Why? You shouldn't care. You can't. You'll waste your time. That's the problem. Or one of them. Just because you have a good idea doesn't mean it can be redeemed or that you can be redeemed. And if you had a proper substructure to do the process that could lead to redemption, but isn't redemption, you wouldn't need to do this for people. This is the post-religious society, such as it is. Of course, you can't be post-religious. It doesn't make any sense, right? But you're trying to be And that's why you want to redeem these things. Why? This guy needs pushback. He needs to be told, if you can't create a practical usage for your ideas, then go do something that is practical in the world. That's what pragmatism is all about at the end of the day. There's lots of ideas. There's lots of good ideas. There's lots of good implementable, practical, useful ideas. The number of people that can make an idea into something useful and practical is tiny. And the number of ideas that you can't tell initially have that quality of being able to be made at all, being able to be made practical, and being able to be made useful, that's a set of skills that not everybody has. The world is enchanted. It's complex. It's not as straightforward as I have an idea. The world will not beat a path to your door if you make a better mousetrap. That is false. That is 19th century thinking. For real. That's where it comes from. Look at the history. They don't look at history. History is very useful for finding what I think of as the most important things, which are the patterns that you can use to navigate the world. The problem with these three is that they're not able to find patterns and they're not able to navigate the world. What they're really doing is sowing confusion. And that is why, dear viewer, you should not give them your time and attention. They're not grateful for it. But I am.